Special thanks to my patrons for supporting my channel. So this might be a controversial opinion, but Deltarune's a really good game. I've wanted to talk about it for a while now, but I also wanted to wait until we got more of the story before putting in my 2 cents. And I'm really glad I did because, don't get me wrong, chapters 1 and 2 of Deltarune were good, but now the game's on a whole other level, and there's so much to dig into. Also, I've been driving Reynard mad gushing about it, so I need another outlet for his sake. For a little bit of background, I've been on Toby Fox's Wild Ride since 2015, when I heard about this new game floating around called Undertale. I tried it, and I loved it. Granted, the fandom got a little out of control, and I wouldn't call it a flawless game, but as a whole, Undertale is very endearing, with its charming characters and iconic music and fun humor and compelling story. Plus, a few traces of a mystery that's persisted almost a decade later. Jesus Christ, almost a decade since Undertale. But long story short, there's a good reason why it became so popular. Ironically, that's also what made me hesitate when Deltarune Chapter 1 came out. How could anything even hope to follow up Undertale? Well, it turns out it's actually really easy. You just have to be Deltarune. The gameplay is more in-depth, the story it's telling feels grander, there's just more of everything I loved, and I'm very comfortable saying now that Deltarune's on track to be a massive success. Of course, I'm also eagerly anticipating and speculating about where it's going to go next, but that can be a little fraught. The sheer ludicrousness of Deltarune's fan theories has become a meme in itself, and sometimes I feel that in the eagerness to find foreshadowing, people lose sight of the bigger picture. I don't want to post discrete examples, both because I don't want to single out any one person, and also because, like every other subreddit, r/Deltarune is so awash in irony that I have a hard time discerning what's genuine and what's sarcastic. The Roaring Knight is Chris from the future? Oh, for God's sake. So I want to go through to talk about what I think is going to happen in future chapters and offer my own thoughts on some popular predictions. And I'm going to do it not by scouring for little details, but by focusing on the unfolding themes of the story. And I think the most relevant theme for our discussion is Toby Fox plays a lot with the relationship of player and game, and it goes beyond surface-level meta-humor. In Undertale, Flowey is able to use save games and so became hardened into apathy and cynicism. He was a quote-unquote player of the game before we superseded his abilities. In Deltarune, the idea is explored even further, and the centerpiece of that connection is Chris. The adopted human child of the Dreamers, they are our player character through the game. Except, not exactly our player character. Even in Undertale, it's fair to say that the player is Frisk. Yeah, Kara and whatnot. Frisk does what you tell them to do. They're our player character. But in Deltarune, the player is definitively not Chris. At the first save point you encounter, you overwrite an existing save file named Chris, thus symbolizing you hijacking their life and autonomy. And Chris doesn't like that. In this case, the idea of control takes the form of agency, and Chris grappling with the player over control of their actions. One of my favorite developments in chapters 3 and 4 is that Chris increasingly does feel like their own character. Up to this point, we knew a little bit about Chris, like how they enjoy pulling pranks, but we're seeing more of Chris shining through in the actions we choose for them. Other characters will comment on Chris saying something reluctantly or enthusiastically. Chris will lash out if we direct them to do something they don't want, although complete an action very technically. For example, opening a door without actually looking inside for us, the player, to see. We've also gotten a bombshell reveal. Chris is secretly collaborating with the Roaring Knight. This puts us in the fascinating position where the player character is directly antagonistic to the player. And yet Chris is not villainous, because in the now canonically named Weirdroot, if you begin trying to manipulate and abuse Noelle, Chris is keen to protect her, and will viciously beat you if you hurt her. One of the most haunting scenes in the Weirdroot so far is Chris desperately trying to get Noelle to not mention the conversation they had the night prior, when the player wasn't looking. A conversation where Chris tried to convince her that the Snowgrave path wasn't real, that it was all a dream, that it was all a prank. A conversation where Chris was trying to save Noelle's feelings. At the end of the chapter in the normal route, Chris receives a message reminding them that they promised to do whatever it is the mysterious, shadowy benefactor had made them promise to do. But at the end of the Weirdroot, they instead get a call confirming that Noelle is waiting for them at the festival tomorrow, before everything fades to black. Exactly what they didn't want us, the player, to know. Both of these routes taken together show that Chris might have ulterior motives, but ultimately they don't want to hurt their friends. As for why they're working with the Roaring Knight, I feel there's a certain sense of inadequacy or helplessness fueling Chris's actions. From the very beginning of the game, the first scene we get of Chris tells us so much. This was the room they shared with her brother Azriel. Azriel's side of the room is filled with trophies and certificates. Chris has nothing on their shelves. Now couple that with the fact that when Rousey attempts to make Chris's ideal room in Castletown, he specifically fills Chris's shelves with awards. They feel almost like an outsider. It doesn't seem to be through any fault of their family. Toriel and Asgore both seem like admirable parents who want to express love and care for Chris. In fact, we hear about how, when they were growing up, Chris asked when their horns would start growing in, just like the rest of their families. And they got Chris a little headband of horns so they could fit in better. But still, I imagine it didn't make those feelings go away completely. You find out in the room Queen builds for Chris that one of their most prominent internet searches is how to use magic, something that monsters can use while humans can't. Chris's self-image is suffering. This is compounded by the fact that their brother is away at college. Again, coming back to the room, I think it's noteworthy that the first room we see in the entire game not only highlights Azriel's accomplishments versus Chris's lack of accomplishments, but highlights Azriel's empty bed, a very visible absence in Chris's life. An absence highlighted to us in little details, like the fact one of Chris's prominent internet searches is "Summer Vacation College When?" An absence that many people in town comment on, saying that Azriel's voice is sorely missed in the choir, and wouldn't Chris like to fill in? Asgore remarks that when Azriel comes back into town that week, they could all go to the diner like they used to. The world is changing around Chris, and they're getting less and less comfortable with it. Isn't that how it goes for all of us? That's a theme Tenna fixates on in Chapter 3. He wants to return to a world where Chris's family and friends gather around him to enjoy what he had to show them. That's what he's desperate to recapture. More than either of the chapter bosses before him, he had that unique connection to Chris's fears and anxieties. We get older. The world changes more and more away from the comforting status quo of our childhoods. Siblings move away. Your mother starts dating Sans Undertale. To reference the song Don't Forget, the places that you know begin to seem like fantasy. Even in the small details, if you have Chris examine a picnic table, they specifically observe that their fingers no longer fit through the holes on the tabletop. Chris is growing up, and it feels like they're losing control of their life. It parallels the literal loss of agency they face from the player. It scares them. And we see that fear expressed when Chris has a panic attack after the hidden Spamton battle in Chapter 2. Seeing him cut his strings only to drop dead? What happens to Chris when they cut to their strings? I believe that anxiety is what motivates them to collaborate with the Roaring Knight. And I have more thoughts about the Knight, but for now I want to jump over to not Susie or Rousey, but Noelle. Noelle Holiday becomes a member of the Fun Gang in Chapter 2, and her character arc in that chapter mirrors the themes of control and agency well. The game established her as a very timid character whom, by her own admission, only felt comfortable saying no to Chris and her father. Otherwise, she was a total pushover, unable to find the willpower to stand up for herself. Ironically, the person who helps to unlock her potential is the chapter's antagonist, Queen, who wants Noelle precisely because she believes she has the willpower necessary to open a second Dark Fountain. In her own words, the time has come for Noelle to recognize her own strength, her own will, her own determination. But it comes around to bite her when Noelle snaps back. "You think listening to you makes me happy? No, I'll never be happy. Not if I'm controlled by you. Why can't you understand that?" And that actually convinces Queen, who then urges her to instead choose the world that makes her happy. Again, Noelle finds the confidence to assert control over her life and choices, and she's rewarded for it. Of course, the weird route goes in the opposite direction, with the player piloting Chris to again slowly manipulate and assert control over Noelle to a degree that crosses into outright abuse. Especially with how the weird route unfolds in the most recent chapters, it is genuinely disturbing to watch. And for the record, in my case, I do mean watch. I'm not playing the weird route for the same reason I never played the genocide route in Undertale. I don't want to make the characters sad. But anyways, her role has expanded in the latest chapters. Since the first chapter, we've heard that she has, or at least had, a sister named December, or Des for short. And we also know that Des isn't in her life anymore. Exactly what happened has not been made clear, but we know that it's bad enough that when Noelle was asked to spell December for a spelling bee, she emotionally collapsed and couldn't do it. We learn more and more how important the holidays were to the Dreamers, that Des and Azriel and Noelle and Chris would all hang out together. Again, this is something that Tenna yearns to return to, and I believe it's something Chris yearns to return to as well. And this is where I'm going to take my first big swing. I do believe that Des is the Roaring Knight. That's not a big swing, I know that's one of the most popular fan theories right now, just hold up. But I do think it's a fan theory that's very solid. The horns of the Roaring Knight resemble the antlers of the Holiday family. Noelle recalls a time when Des had playfully tried to beat Chris up with a wiffle ball bat. The knight's sword resembles a baseball bat, and it's animated in a way that draws our attention to that resemblance. Des was into stuff like death metal and horror movies. The design of the Roaring Knight definitely fits someone with those interests. Plus, we know that the knight has a connection to Carol Holiday, the mother, through their shared access to the underground bunker. Carol Holiday also has a connection to Chris, who takes pains to tell them that they are always welcome around the Holiday's home. There are so many connections with Des, and Des is referenced so often in the story so far for somebody who hasn't shown up yet, that it seems the most logical step for the story to take. I also believe it would be an emotionally impactful step as well, which is the most important thing. The question though becomes, how did this happen? How would Des have turned from a beloved friend and sister into this? I don't have many concrete ideas for this, but considering the themes I've been discussing so far, I believe something terrible happened. Maybe a severe illness like Rudy's dealing with, or maybe there was an accident of some kind. No, I don't believe Asgore hit Des with his truck. I feel like there'd be a far more hostile response from the Holidays upon seeing him if that was the case. But my point is, something bad happened to Des, and maybe Noelle believes she's dead. Carol was unwilling to accept that though, and made some deal with the devil to keep Des alive. Probably through some messed up scientific experimentation, and the Dark Fountains are part of that. Some way or another, creating the fountains helps towards saving Des, or at least Carol believes it does. Chapter 4 showed that Dark Fountains can functionally resurrect people, with the dust of Garrison Boom forming a darkener version of him that the Fun Gang are able to interact with. Importantly, however, this only occurs by accident. When Susie tries to intentionally create a second Dark World to try and ask for Gerson's advice, it goes horribly wrong. I think something similar happened to Des. Carol has the resources to do something like this, she's secretive enough to cover it up, and I see in this a parallel to Alphys's true lab experiments with determination in Undertale. This would also explain Chris's involvement. Again, their life is changing beyond their control. If they had a chance to save their friend, to bring back one part of their past that had been taken away from them, why wouldn't they take it? And most importantly, it would thematically fit. The idea that Carol is trying to assert control over a situation that she is ultimately unable to. Switching gears now, let's talk about Fluffy Boy Rousey, whom we got some really big developments on in Chapter 4. We still have some outstanding questions, of course, such as which item he derives from in the light world, and also what he's telling Chris when he tries to guide the player's attention away from them at key moments. Rousey knows the player is an active player in the narrative, but how he knows that and just what his thoughts are towards us are not clear. But we have learned one thing. Since we met him, he's wanted to be friendly and helpful and kind as much as possible, to the point that a common fan theory was that Rousey was secretly evil, because there was no way anyone could possibly be that cheerily selfless, and it turns out that's kinda right. Rousey's been trying to keep up a mask of happiness, while deep down he's racked with a dismal self-image. Darkners are derived from items in the light world, and items are meant to be used. In his own words, Rousey believes Darkner's only purpose, his only purpose, is to assist the Lighteners. It's the only way we can feel truly fulfilled. The apocalyptic roaring he warns us about in Chapter 2 is characterized by Darkners being reduced to stone and Lighteners having to fend for themselves as the world is overtaken by darkness. It speaks to the role that Rousey believes Darkners play in Lighteners' lives, and it manifests itself in a heartbreaking level of people-pleasing that pushed him to his breaking point in Chapter 4. He implores Chris and Susie to not get overly attached to him, because he's just meant to be a thing that supports them, not a full-fledged friend. The thing is, though, Rousey's mindset is espoused by one other important character, the Roaring Knight. Think about what they tell the Darkners to manipulate them. King is derived from a playing card, the King of Spades, notably the highest suit in the deck. Even if he spoke with the rhetoric of freeing Darkners from Lightners, he embraces his role as one of the highest ranked cards and rules as a tyrant. In Chapter 2, Queen is derived from a laptop, who wants to embrace her role as a technology Lightners are already enthralled by. In Chapter 3, Tenna the Television is told by the Knight that if he does what they want, everyone will watch him, once more embracing the role given to him by Lightners. Notice how each of these goals involve the Darkner choosing to accept what they were made to be. You might say that they've accepted that you can't choose who you are in this world, echoing the very opening of the whole game. In fact, look at how Tenna is spoken to by Rousey once he's defeated. Rousey tells him that he's only made things worse. Darkners go obsolete. We shouldn't make Lightners worry about us. It's honestly rather somber, and the game explicitly draws a parallel with how Rousey views himself. But then he's cut off by Susie, who tells Tenna no, he's going to find a new place, he'll be watched again, he doesn't have to resign himself to being thrown away. All of his efforts will have a positive ending after all. And with that, let's get to the best character in the game. Susie Deltarune is so amazing. Look at her go! Her character growth has been so amazing to watch, and it's been the clearest example of the theme of agency. At the beginning of the game, she was in a very bad spot, and it's when she's in that very bad spot that she repeats the idea, your choices don't matter, which apparently some people took as a sincere expression to the player. You know, a thing that Susie said when she was wrong. Because since that point, it's become clearer and clearer that choices do matter. Chapter 1's ending is quite different if you take a pacifist approach. Chapter 2 diverges dramatically if you take the Snowgrave path, with Berdly being hospitalized if you go all the way and leaving Noelle in a fragile state. By Chapter 3, your choices will affect whether or not Tenna can be repaired following the Knight's attack on him. And in Chapter 4, the narrative is literally about trying to defy prophecy. All of this to say, can we stop taking the there's only one ending thing so literally? At this point, if you're going to look at different routes that have different characters survive and different relationships forming between them and say, no, these are the same ending, then I don't know what to say. Anyways, I was talking about Susie. Over the course of the story, she's learned to break the cycle that had kept her isolated and bitter, and especially after the mentee ship she developed with Old Man Gerson, she's become the standard bearer for the belief that it is possible to rewrite your destiny. You may not be able to choose who you are in this world, but you can choose who you become. And Susie has chosen to become a hero. In fact, I'd almost say that she's becoming the hero. This is an idea that I think would fit well with the kind of storytelling these games use. A twist of sorts, where it turns out the main character is not in fact Chris. What if the main character turns out to be Susie? So much of the prophecy seems to be focused on her, building her up. And look at how in Chapter 2, Susie and Rousey learn their own act functions independently, reducing Chris's role as the leader of the group. Now, admittedly, this idea is a little out there. It's very possible that the prophecy focused on Susie just to build the suspense of there being an unfortunate ending, and that Susie and Rousey learning their separate acts is just a way to open up the gameplay more. However, in her fight with Old Man Gerson, he tells her that she holds a pen that can overwrite the darkness, a white pen called Hope. She dismisses this idea, saying that Chris is the one who holds the pen. But I feel like that's the perfect setup for that belief of hers to be challenged again. Given how much screen time is given to Susie separately from Chris, I feel like her turning out to be the real main character is a possible twist that could have some very interesting implications. I also believe that in the next couple chapters, she's going to make a very drastic mistake. My idea is based on the line she has in Chapter 4, where she laments that they aren't powerful enough to confront the Roaring Knight effectively. It mirrors the line from Snowgrave, a drive to get stronger. And of course, a pursuit of power for a noble cause can lead to terrible temptations. I doubt that she'd genuinely go evil or anything like that. Yeah, Undertale and Deltarune can go to dark places, but as a whole, Toby Fox seems more interested in making, you know, a fun game. But I could see her making a reckless choice out of a desire to protect her friends. That also feels like a natural next step narratively. She's had a lot of time to grow, feels like a good point to throw a major test at her and see what she still has to learn. I think that could tie into what has been foreshadowed for Chapter 5. During the fight with Old Man Gerson, he tells us the story of an in-universe book series that parallels the game so far. In the fifth part of the story, he summarizes as, "The vast garden is charred in an inferno of jealousy." A moment where Susie will be challenged and maybe backslide a bit, before pulling herself together and pushing forward to the conclusion again. But speaking of Susie's importance to the theme of freedom and rejecting the chains of destiny, there's another important connection to be made here. I've mentioned a few times already that she grows close to Old Man Gerson, or at least the Darkner derived from the real Old Man Gerson's remains. He talks about how the prophecy can be changed, rewritten, that Susie has the power to claim her freedom against the forces of fate. Freedom, hence the freedom leitmotif showing up in his battle song. This musical connection ties Gerson with Spamton and Jevil, and as I think about it, I'm coming to a realization. So W.D. Gaster is already more present in Deltarune than in Undertale, even if indirectly, and
Some people
what's that?
might not know who Gaster is.
Oh, right, some casual viewers might not know, because I have people who aren't deep Undertale Deltarune fans on my channel. Okay, let's run through this really quickly as possible. So, for those who may not know, if you've ever seen this character in fan art or posted elsewhere online, he's one of the most intense mysteries on Undertale and also arguably not even in the game. But in approximately 1% of Undertale runs, you can meet mysterious grayed out characters who talk about the previous royal scientist before Alphys, who was named Dr. W.D. Gaster. He was a genius, but fell into his creation and was shattered across time and space. These characters are called Gaster followers, and will mysteriously disappear after you speak with them. This particular depiction of him only shows up in every one of 1,000 Undertale runs, and honestly we don't even have actual confirmation it's Gaster. He's just called Mystery Man. If you literally break the game by editing your file and move yourself to a room that doesn't even exist as part of the game map, you get this scene. The unreadable Wingdings font and a bizarre distorted sound, someone talking about darkness levels rising, running an experiment. The idea is that the initials WDG fill in for Wingding, the same way Papyrus and Sans are written in Papyrus and Sans. Again, he's barely in the game, and yet he's captured the imagination of the entire fandom. Anyways, to come back to Deltarune, he's starting to become more and more present. That is to say, traces of him actually appear within the game now. During the hidden dialogue in Undertale, he talks about photon levels being negative, mirroring the way Ralsei describes how dark fountains work. The noise we hear with this dialogue in Undertale shows up in Deltarune as garbage noise if Chris calls on their phone in the Dark World. Spamton's last call before he snapped was said to have only been garbage noise. It's a chain of connections and parallels that I think makes it clear that this mysterious figure is drawing closer and closer. But consider what I said earlier about the Roaring Knight inviting King and Queen Antenna to embrace what they were made to do in order to manipulate them. In contrast, Jevil and Spamton and Gerson all focus on breaking their bonds, even if it cost Jevil and Spamton their well-being. And if that's true, then that places W.D. Gaster as the thematic opposition to the Roaring Knight. This would line up with an idea I've had for a while. And I say idea rather than theory because this is just kind of a vibes thing. I don't think W.D. Gaster is evil. He's spooky and mysterious, and it's implied he had some kind of Frankenstein-esque mishap that caused his demise, but I don't think he's malevolent. Mostly because, again, that doesn't seem to be the vibe these games are going for. I believe he's at worst a neutral presence, perhaps having good intentions that are frustrated along the way. The fact we see him aligning with the motif and theme of freedom is the first substantial argument I can offer for that. And I will. My man's innocent until proven guilty. Watch, now that I've said that, in Chapter 5 he's gonna kill Ralsei or something, I don't know. And you know what? I'm gonna extend my predictions even further along a thematic route. I think I know what the hell is going on with all the Undertale connections. This is something that has almost fallen by the wayside with the recent chapters. But I remember in Chapter 1, there was so much hype around seeing Toriel and Undyne and Alphys and Asgore and Sans again. Oh, and an adventure with these new guys too. Now that Deltarune's story is properly established and flourishing, there doesn't seem to be as much concern for the legacy characters. Clearly this is a different setting for them to be in, a completely different timeline. And yet, isn't it strange that they've settled into such similar roles? Royal Guardswoman Undyne is a police officer. Intellectual Alphys is a teacher and just as infatuated with anime. Toriel and Asgore are just as divorced. And the game encourages you to remember their connections from Undertale, like when you ask Undyne about Alphys, despite the pair having had no connection in this game. Could that just be a cheeky joke? Sure. But it does fit in well with the theme. Even in this completely separate world, these characters are fated towards a specific role in life, the same traits and similar positions. And I think that's something that's going to be addressed before the end of the game. Again, it all ties into the idea of how much freedom we have to control who we are and what our fates will be. Again, I could try to dig into some really granular details and roll the dice on some wild predictions that may or may not come true. However, all of this is just me trying to use the actual narrative of the game to predict where things are going to go. There might be a whole bunch of twists that prove me wrong. No matter what though, I'll be ready for Chapter 5 next year to find out more. God, I don't know how to conclude this video. Oh, you know, there is one more very important thing I need to comment on. Suzella's endgame. Okay, bye-bye.